Right. Welcome, everybody. This is the QM webinar presentation on COLO profiles and competencies. COLO stands for Chief Online Learning Officer. Give me a yes in the chat if you are the senior most online learning leader at your institution, whether you have the title of COLO or not. And we're going to be talking about titles a little bit today. So I am joined today by Dr. Eric Fredericksen, and he really is the lead for this most recent COLO survey. This is building on his past research, so he has a long and deep research bench looking at chief online learning officers. He is also one of my writing partners on CLOE, the Changing Landscape of Online Education report. So he is going to be leading us off to give us a little bit of background connected to his previous research. So big thanks to him, and also University of Rochester. So he is the AVP for online learning at University of Rochester, as well as a professor in educational leadership. My name is Bethany Simunich. I'm QM's VP of Innovation and Research. And as I mentioned, Eric and I also work together on CLOE. And we have a third partner for this research, Julie Uranis. She is the Senior VP for Online and Strategic Initiatives at UPCEA. She was unable to join us today, so I'm going to be covering her section, but she is with us in spirit. So thanks to Julie as well. A little bit about today's webinar. Please do stay in the moment. You are going to receive the recording, so you don't have to make notes. You can watch it again and again at your leisure. We do suggest that you ask questions, and if you have comments or feedback, please go ahead and put those in the chat box, or you could use the Q&A. And you can also enable subtitles and closed captioning for yourself if you need that. Okay, so a little bit about what we're going to cover today. So this is a survey that was sent out to Chief Online Learning Officers in 2024, earlier this year. And we're going to cover a little bit about the study itself, and like I said, the background, and also the institutional context that our COLOs are working within. And then we're also going to talk about the background of Chief Online Learning Officers, their experience and their skill set. And then we're going to talk about COLO competencies. So this is something that UPCEA developed, and we incorporated into the survey this year. And we're going to close it out with staying informed and talking about institutional challenges that COLOs are facing. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric now, and he's going to talk a little bit about the study itself.
All right, thanks, Bethany. First thing I want to say is I want to say thank you to everyone attending today, and for all of those COLOs that are with us today. Thank you very much for contributing and participating in the study. Honestly, we sincerely appreciate you. Couldn't do it without you. I'd also like to say thank you to Julie at UPCEA and Bethany at QM for partnering on this research, as well as putting up with me during this project. This is our second webinar for sharing these results. So bear with us. We have a lot to cover, and we're going to do our very best to get through as much of it as we can and give you a good sense of what you and your colleagues had to say. We do hope you and your institution will find this valuable in a few ways, from your own self-assessment, perhaps plans for professional development, and even some institutional benchmarking. In terms of the goals of the study, we wanted to revisit and update the research that I initially had done about COLOs. Bethany's right. We do lots of research around, through the CLOE project, and that touches upon all kinds of areas, including institutional strategies and activities and so on. But we've wanted to like revisit the individual COLO, the profile, the background, experiences, and so on, like I had done several years ago. And so that's what we did with this study. But then on top of it, with our friend Julie Uranis at UPCEA, we wanted to also explore the COLO perspective on the COLO competencies. And how we came at that was both having the COLO provide feedback about the importance of those COLO competencies for the institution, as well as their own self-assessment. So those are the goals. Let's go down to the next slide. Let me say a little bit about our methodology. Bethany mentioned we did it this summer. It built on national studies on online learning leadership that we did back in 2017 and 18. And again, we complemented it with these UPCEA COLO competencies. You can see that, we did this in July, every week. And then you notice that there's like a bonus, at the very end. And that was our recognition that people were contributing over the summer, but we also got a lot of notes from our colleagues and peers across the country letting us know that they're on vacation, but they'd be back in time for the start of the fall semester. And so we made a decision to offer one more opportunity right at the beginning of the fall semester. And we had quite a few more people contribute because of it. Survey instrument, details are here, 25 multiple choice questions, and we had 6 open-ended. And we reached out to more than 3,600 people, and we had more than 500 people respond to this. Next slide. I would say this just summarizes for you, we had good representation across all 3 sectors, public 2-year, public 4-year, and private 4-year. You can see we did have a few private for-profit responses as well, and those will be included in any charts that would represent the total response. We did analyze a number of questions by institutional sector, and when we did those, we actually really focused on the first 3 there: the public 2-year, public 4-year, and public 4-year and private 4-years. Okay. All right, so the next section is about the institutional context. So next slide is, how did you and your institution define the scope of online learning, right? So it's the scope question. How does the institution define it for the COLO positions? In this case, the COLOs were able to check all that apply, and you can see the numbers of responses here. This was out of 441 responses to this specific question. So the red represents 90% had responsibility for fully online courses, 81%. The blue had responsibility for hybrid, and the green was 55%. So even web-based, support or activities, resources that are supporting face-to-face courses are also part of the scope of this individual. Okay. Other part of context related to reporting relationships. And if you're willing to, bear with me and combine the blue and the green. So either reporting to the provost, which is the blue, or green, which is the other senior academic leader, that represents more than 2/3 of the responses going to, academic leadership here. And we think this makes total sense. It's very consistent with what we saw several years ago, because online learning it's an academic activity. Take a look at I guess I would describe that as kind of an orangish color for CIO. Notice that there's a very small percentage reporting to the CIO. And I think, to me, this kind of counters potential misperceptions that online learning is about technology. Doesn't mean we don't collaborate with our, esteemed colleagues in IT. It's just that's not the connecting point for the organization. Okay. In this study, we also asked about membership in, the following institutional groups and committees. Now, you can see a little more emphasis on the provost and dean's cabinet, and of course, the online learning committee. But even in that last column there for the online learning committee, I think it's interesting that almost a quarter are not a member of that. And now you're going to hear, a researcher, admit to one of those situations when we get the data back, and then we realize we should have asked the question maybe a little bit differently or given another option here. It might have been helpful to provide a third choice for that question, which is, we don't have this committee. So maybe that possibly could include some of the no's that are in blue there. Okay, next slide. We also asked whether the institution has used online learning efforts as a catalyst for organizational changes. And you can see here in red that most had. We did investigate this one across institutional sector, and the responses were very consistent. And I would even say that I looked at this back in 2016 and 17. It was true then. It was even a little bit higher, about 10% higher for yes back then. But institutions are using these activities as a catalyst for organizational changes. We wanted to get a sense of how the institution was organized, their overall sort of general approach to online learning. And, and basically this is a centralization, decentralization question. And you can see that it's actually a pretty nice normal distribution curve here, from completely centralized down to completely decentralized. I did look at this by institutional sector, and I would just say there's maybe a slight bit more of private four-years leaning on the centralized side compared to their public counterparts. But again, this normal distribution curve is probably the right sort of takeaway relative to this centralization, decentralization question. Now, here's the thing that we wanted to do, especially following that question about being a catalyst for organizational changes. We wanted to go another step and ask about, okay, what groups at your institution, or think about groups or functions or units, have been unified within the organization. And you can see the breakdown here, as we go, the red, blue, green, and so on. Instructional design, the LMS, online learning policy development, academic and educational technology, and faculty development and training. Now we decided to draw a line, this red line here at 50%, so it would represent the majority of COLOs, saying that these are the groups that have been unified. So it's those first 5 tend to be the ones that get unified with the COLO to support their initiatives. We also saw that this was pretty consistent across sectors, public 2-year, public 4-year, private 4-year, very similar kinds of response of these same 5 units. If I did compare this back to the earlier studies, the only extra one that fell above the red line is the one in yellow, the course design and multimedia. It's falling slightly below it this time, but that was the only difference I would say for this question. All right, that's a little bit about institutional context. Let's take a look at the background experiences and skills of the individual COLOs. First question we asked about was whether the COLO had been promoted from within or recruited externally. And you can see the response here in red. The majority promoted from within, and this was consistent across the institutional sectors. Now, we asked open-ended questions about current title, and the coding of the 378 responses to this one yielded the following. Director was the most noted reply, and then AVP, and then Dean and VP, and you can see the rest here. Director was the highest across all sectors. But in breaking this down by those institutional sectors, we saw more AVP responses, in second place for the private and public 4-year schools, and the number 2 choice for the public 2-year schools was Dean. So that was the difference here. We then asked, well, what title or what position did you hold prior to this position? And the coding of these 361 responses yielded the following. Director was the most noted reply. But then take a look at the blue option here. The number 2 response was a faculty position, and then ID and AVP, and you can see the rest. Director was the highest, number 1 choice across all sectors. We did see the AVP response for second place again for the private 4-year schools, but the number 2 response for the public 4-year and 2-year schools was faculty. And of course, if we asked what your current title is, what your previous title was, you know what we had to ask next, right? We had to ask COLOs, what do you envision as your next role or position? And so this one was kind of fun and interesting and a little bit surprising. So we had 292 responses to this, and the number 1 answer was VP. I know that the type might be a little small, but please note the second choice in blue there. Number 2 choice was retirement. And then this was followed by Dean and then AVP. As you go across, I don't know if you can see the orangish bar there too, in number, the 5th place. That choice I labeled as happy. And so this is just my simple coding of the response. And it's basically, I labeled it that because it spoke to the COLO's enthusiasm and commitment to continuing in their current role. Basically, they were happy being the COLO. So that's what that response is. All sectors had VP as the number one choice. As I broke this down by sector, though, the private four-year schools had happy as the number two choice, but the public four-year and public two-year schools, their number two choice was retirement. The last thing I want to mention here is go all the way over to the number 10 response, and that's the one in kind of a different shade of green, and that's labeled as new institution. And this represents COLOs commenting about moving to a new institution. So as I take a look at this this item, I think it's interesting, and it may be interesting for institutional executives, or presidents or provosts, to see if you're willing to combine the blue retirement with the different colored green new institution. That means 18% or almost 1 out of 5 COLOs, they won't be there in the future. And so might need to think about identifying, recruiting, maybe or developing someone new in terms of some, succession planning. Okay. So really interesting question there. All right. In terms of other parts of the individual's experience and background, we asked about overall higher ed experience. You can see the majority of COLOs have at least 16 years of experience. Only about 1 out of 7 are new, and this was consistent across sectors. Now, we asked COLOs if they had a faculty appointment. And you can see overall, more than 40% did. Bethany titled this slide, most COLOs don't hold a faculty appointment, but I was going to make an adjustment to this and add a but to this. And so the but is the next slide. And that is, we saw differences across institutional sector for this question. And so if you take a look at the private four-year schools, you actually rise above 50%. So the majority of COLOs in the private four-year schools, they do have a faculty appointment. Drops down to about 42% in the public four-year schools and in less than 30%. Yeah, less than 30% within the public two-year schools. So this was statistically significant and again, varies by sector. We also asked about academic credentials, and you can see the highest degree here that the COLO received. And I guess if I'm going to ask you to allow me to combine the orange and the yellow together. So the EDDs and PhDs, that represents, the majority of COLOs having a doctoral degree. And then we complemented this question in the next slide. And we asked about, which fields they had earned a degree. And the responses from COLOs, there was response, and they could check all that applied, and there was responses across lots of different areas. But as you can see in green, then by far the one most selected was the field of education for COLOs. Then we asked COLOs, have you been an online student? And I think this probably is the bias of, researchers, because I think we've all felt like this, having the experience of being an online student is really valuable, that having that direct firsthand knowledge about what students go through, it's good for the COLOs to have this. So we asked about it. You can see there's a couple kinds of yeses here. So the red is yes, I've taken one online course as a student. The blue is yes, I've taken multiple online courses as a student, and the green is I've earned a complete online degree program as a student. And so the no here is 21%, or just slightly over, what this really is saying is almost 4 out of 5 said yes in some way. So that's almost 80%. And we did look at this by institutional sector. We did see a little bit of a difference here. 85% of the public two-year schools said yes, compared to 76% of their private and public four-year counterparts. Overall, though, it's really quite impressive, I think, that so many COLOs have this experience. All right. Now, the last part of my section here is relates to sharing responses to areas of experiences for COLOs. I'm going to say one thing up front, because then it'll apply to all of these slides. So each area will have the same presentation about how many years of experience that the COLO had according to this scale from I didn't have any, less than 1 to 5 years, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, 16 to 20, and more than 20. When we go through all of it, I think when you consider all of it together, I think it will speak to the importance of a blend of necessary skills and how the COLO needs to effectively work across so many different groups at the institution. So the first one related to years of management leadership experience, and you can see if we put a line at least 6 years, so splitting it to the purple and to the right, 84% of COLOs have at least 6 years of management leadership experience. And then we asked about, go to the next slide. Did we miss one? Did you jump? Oh, online teaching. Here we go. No, if we go to online teaching, that was 70% of COLOs have at least 6 years of online teaching experience. When we also asked about face-to-face teaching. We had 68% have at least 6 years of face-to-face teaching experience. 77% of COLOs have at least 6 years of curriculum and instructional design experience. Starts to come down there when we get into educational research, but still the majority, 53% of COLOs have at least 6 years of educational research experience. And then the last one is we asked about IT experience. And this one I think stands out a little bit. 45% of COLOs have at least 6 years of experience. So that's in the minority. And you can see more than a third do not have any at all. But I think this aligns with the earlier discussion I was trying to share that online, makes sense because online learning is not an IT activity, although we count on and we depend on our valued colleagues in the IT organization to provide and support a robust IT infrastructure that online learning requires. So I think that's how we make sense of these. All right, Bethany, I think I'm going to pause here. That's enough for me. I'm going to turn it over to you, my friend, to talk about the COLO competencies.
All right. Thank you so much, Eric. So that wall was a good setup for then talking about these competencies. So as a little bit of an introduction, the COLO competencies are something that UPCEA developed, and they did a meta-analysis of different competency sets related to professional associations in higher education. So they reviewed all of these items, they did some coding and themes, and aligned them with their own documents, their Hallmark of Excellence documents. And they were validated by multiple stakeholder groups and then also reviewed and validated again by the UPCEA Council of Chief Online Learning Officers. So UPCEA really did a good job of really digging in there, seeing what the literature already said about these competencies, and then validating them against the skills and the background and experience needed for today's senior online leaders. So the UPCEA competencies for professional, continuing, and online education practitioners, which includes Chief Online Learning Officers, can be grouped into what you see here on the screen: entrepreneurship, partnerships, relationship building, resource management. So you see a lot of the things even that Eric was touching on a little bit. Supporting and advocating for faculty and students. You can see how having a teaching background, for example, would be an aid to a senior online leader in supporting and advocating for faculty. Program planning, market research, information and digital technology, critical thinking, and then also professionalism and ethics. So what we did for the COLO survey is Julie worked to adapt some of these so that the COLOs that are responding could really think about these important skills that really need to be in possession, for these senior online leaders. So critical thinking, decision making in terms of strategy for their institution, the complex situations that senior online leaders have to deal with, especially in today's higher ed climate, where enrollment for online options are a little bit higher than on-ground. Students are still demanding some online options, and that can be a complex situation and can cause tensions at higher ed institutions. So that's a lot to navigate. Looking at those soft skills as well, and strategic thinking, leadership attributes, keeping current with trends, policy information, both federal, institutional, local, all of those things, and then things related just to institutional and operational management. So there was a lot in this section looking at those different skill sets. And so this next set of slides here, they're a little bit complex. Let me give you a little bit of an orientation first. So on most of these slides, you're going to see two different items. So for this one, for example, we're looking at think strategically with flexibility and creativity. And we're also looking at engages in evidence-based decision-making, which requires collaboration. So these are the two things that we're looking at, and they're color-coded here, red and blue. And so we asked our senior online leaders that were taking the survey, how important is this at your particular institution, first? And then secondly, doing a little self-assessment. How skilled do you feel you are in this particular area? So we're starting out with those items where most of our COLOs or senior online leaders, because as Eric pointed out, a lot of those COLOs don't have the COLO title. They're at the director level. But these are ones where you marked that you really did not need a lot of improvement in your own skills. So looking at that strategic thinking, and evidence-based decision-making in general here marked very important to institutions in terms of this role. And also in that self-assessment, most of our senior online leaders marked that they were pretty skilled in these two areas. Next, looking at analytical approach and leadership. So here we're looking at that analytical and critical thinking, really that analysis that's involved in all those decisions that those senior online leaders need to be a part of. And then also some leadership attributes. So models effective leadership. It demonstrates a willingness to provide direction. That's really crucial, I think, in today's climate. Again, both of these also ranked very important at higher ed institutions. And in that self-assessment, our senior online leaders said they also felt they were very skilled in these two areas as well. In terms of building relationships, so motivating and developing team members, you can see how this might relate, for example, to the slide that Eric talked about related to centralization and decentralization. A lot of times you need to work across units when you're in online learning and higher ed. Also looking at building internal and external relationships, ones that could potentially build capacity, move initiatives forward, also very crucial for online leaders. Again, we see here marked very important by the majority of respondents. Also very skilled in this area, but we're seeing a little bit of a shift here. You're starting to see a little bit of an uptick in that somewhat skilled. So these are places maybe where our COLOs were recognizing that I have skills in this area, but definitely something maybe that I want to improve on a little bit. In terms of integrity and professionalism, adheres to professional and personal standards, professional conduct, and then also demonstrates broadly accepted personal and professional attributes, often described as soft skills. This is another one that was very highly rated in terms of importance at institutions. Again, with the self-assessment, you see a similar pattern to the previous ones. Very skilled in general, but a small uptick in that somewhat skilled response. In terms of organizational and operational attributes, so managing the overall operational resources for optimizing the operational performance, and also engaging in active learning to stay current with trends. And this is something we're going to talk about a little bit later as well. How do those senior online leaders stay informed and stay up to date? So you're starting to see another little shift here. These were somewhat less important overall at the institution, so still marked by the majority of our respondents as very important, but you see a larger uptick there in somewhat important at the institution. And then again, you see the corresponding pattern there with self-assessment. You're seeing a little bit of a decrease in senior online leaders saying, I am very skilled in this area, a little bit more saying I'm somewhat skilled in these two areas. In terms of inclusive environments, so navigating complex and sensitive situations, I think that's definitely an attribute required by today's COLOs, and also possesses social perceptiveness and orientation to facilitate diverse, inclusive, and culturally sensitive working environments. A little bit less important at the institutional level, although still overall very important. And again, similar pattern there in the self-assessment, especially for that second one about facilitating diverse and inclusive environments. You see a much larger uptick there in our COLOs saying, I'm somewhat skilled in this area, but I would not say I was very skilled. And you're starting to see a little small uptick there in needs improvement. So these are some more of those soft skill areas that we were mentioning. In terms of governance and compliance, here you start to see even more of a pattern shift. So Understanding those laws and regulations and policies that are relevant to the position. This is something that frankly is hard to keep up with, especially in again today's climate. So very important. At most institutions, almost 300 of our respondents said that. Yet in terms of whether or not they were very skilled at this, I think we see one of the lowest numbers we've seen so far. 173 of our respondents said they're very skilled. About the same number, 168 said somewhat skilled. So this is a difficult thing to keep up with. And I think what we're seeing in the responses here is that our senior online leaders recognize that. That second item there engages in inductive and deductive reasoning for the purposes of forming rules and policies or conclusions. Again, very important. A little bit more in terms of very skilled versus somewhat skilled, but we're also seeing some marked needs improvement, especially in that first item. In terms of curriculum and faculty, here's where we're going to see even a larger shift. So Eric mentioned that especially private 4 years, you may have faculty appointments, but also most of our senior online leaders do have a teaching background. They've served as online students, so they have I think, a much fuller picture of what online can be. And they've had positions in different facets of that, both teaching and learning and whatnot. So they do understand, I think, a lot of this, but in terms of the curriculum design, the sourcing, the revisions of learning strategies and theories, so things related to instruction and curriculum, about 250 said very important, most said very skilled as well. That second item there, though, marshaling necessary support to identify, recruit, retain, and develop subject matter experts or faculty for programs. This was marked as a little bit less important overall at the institution, and also something where the senior online leader respondents said, I'm more somewhat skilled than very skilled. So this is the first time where we really see those numbers kind of reversed. 174 said somewhat in terms of their self-assessment of those skills, and 150 said very skilled. And we also had 32 that said needs improvement. So this could also be pointing to the fact that they may not be in charge of recruiting or developing faculty for their programs. And so this is not a skill that they are working to develop a lot. And that kind of goes back to the point that Eric made earlier, that sometimes you realize once we get the data back that maybe we didn't ask, exactly the right question. So if this is something, again, that really is not part of their job, they may not see it as a skill that they need to develop as much. In terms of financial models and entrepreneurship, understands the implication of financial models, revenue sources, and higher ed budgeting. So that's in the red this time. Very important, marked by 244. But again, you see a pretty even response there between very skilled and somewhat skilled. And also 44 of our respondents said this is an area where I have identified they need to improve their skill level. That second one in blue, that entrepreneurial mindset and business acumen really needed to guide those initiatives and move them forward in these complex and changing environments. Fairly important to institutions, but this is another one where our respondents marked it as very skilled, somewhat skilled, and again, needs improvement. So again, you're starting to see a little bit of a leveling off here. And you're also seeing that these are usually a different skill set that may not have been something that they developed if they came up, for example, through the faculty ranks. These are much more things that are related to business acumen, for example. In terms of marshaling resources, so we have 3 different ones that we're looking at on this particular slide. Plans, executes, and evaluates programs relevant to their institution. That's in red. Very important to the institution. Mostly our senior online leaders mark themselves as very skilled here in their self-assessment, but there's still a good chunk that said somewhat skilled. This is an area they might want to improve. Possesses functional and operational knowledge of information management, digital technologies. Pretty similar pattern here, a little bit larger group marking themselves as somewhat skilled versus very skilled. And lastly, looking at managing human resources for the purposes of hiring and employing staff. And depending on how online is situated institution, this may be a big part of their job or may not be a big part of their job. So I think you see that reflected in the level of importance at the institution as well. But you also see a much larger group saying somewhat skilled. And again, that needs improvement section is one of the larger ones for our questions. In terms of attracting learners, we're looking at 3 different ones on this slide as well. So this is the student companion to the faculty slide in terms of identifying, recruiting, and retaining students in programs. We're also looking at market research, prospective student participant needs to guide those marketing activities. That's very crucial, especially in today's more competitive online environment. And then lastly, an understanding of those marketing strategies. So this is something that I in particular paid attention to. We've been talking in the past couple of years a little bit in Chloe about marketing, especially for online programs. And as you can see, you see a much different data pattern here. A lot of our senior online leaders really were mixed in terms of importance of these three different items at their institution. But I think this is the response where we see a lot more ranking this as not important than we have seen on these previous attributes and competencies. And again, you see, corresponding data pattern when you look at the self-assessment in terms of their own skill set. A lot more of our senior online respondents marked this as needs improvement or said that they are somewhat skilled. So you see that the majority there did not say that they were very skilled in this area. And so again, a marked departure from some of those previous slides that we've seen here. I would say that this is one big takeaway here. We find this in Chloe data as well, that there's really has not been, I think, the deep connection that we would want to see between marketing efforts and online initiatives, those who are in charge of online learning at an institution. And this might be a place to have those better and deeper connections at your institution. Again, more online programs, more online courses equals more online options. And that points to maybe paying a lot more attention in terms of marketing for market differentiation and really what you want to highlight for your own institution. In terms of rounding this out, we're going to lastly look at facilities for these competencies, managing facilities for the purposes of educational opportunities. Again, you can see mixed level of importance at institutions. For the majority of institutions here, it's either somewhat or not important. So this is, I think, the first one where it's very clearly not very important at the majority of our responding institutions. And you see a pretty similar data pattern in terms of that self-assessment. The majority say not very skilled here. They had put themselves in the somewhat skilled column. And this, again, this could also be that this is something that is simply not under the Chief Online Learning Officer purview at a particular institution. So in summary, the senior online leaders that responded to the survey felt that they had greater confidence in those skills and that skill set for those things that were within their control and within the control of maybe their offices or the teams that they were managing, with some exceptions. So diversity, regulations, policies, things related to the specific institutional context. They did mark several areas that they feel in their own self-assessment need some improvement, interacting with others. So some of those soft skills we brought out, faculty, business, and finance. So some of those more business-related attributes. Again, if they came up maybe through the faculty ranks as opposed to coming in from the outside or from another section at the institution, they may not have some of as much strength in some of the business-related skills or organizational-related skills. Also HR and IT, and as Eric mentioned, they may or may not be connected to information technology at their institution. Trying to balance what's necessary and what's important, and looking, I think, maybe at some things that are more important now than they were in previous years, like marketing, as I mentioned, also attracting new learners. So with that, we are going to move to the last sections of our survey, and we asked our COLOs about how they stay informed and also what types of challenges they're facing at their institution, especially with regard to moving some of those online initiatives forward. So in terms of staying informed, there's a variety of ways that our COLOs said that they keep themselves informed. You could see number one way there, almost 70% of our respondents said publications. And those, could include journals, it could include other types of publications, grade literature, et cetera, as well. About half of our respondents said going to conferences, going to different events and whatnot, that helps them stay informed, stay connected, keeps them especially connected to their network, I would assume. And then almost half, 46%, said they rely on online learning related organizations. You see, there's a smattering of other ways that our COLOs stay informed, connecting with peers, 41%, research, webinars such as this one, podcasts, and a few other things got some small representation. The top ways to stay informed did vary a little bit by sector. So you can see that private 4-year and public 4-year, they have some similarity there. But when you look at public 2 years, they're really splitting the ways that they stay informed pretty evenly between those publications, conferences and events, and organizations. Whereas if you look at those 4-year institutions, they're leaning a lot more heavily towards those publications to stay informed, relying a lot events and organizations. In terms of those organizational memberships, we asked our COLOs, are you a member of the following organizations? Is it something that you're a member of, but you are considering dropping that membership? Maybe you're not a member now, but you are considering joining, or you just are not a member and you're not considering joining. So these are some of the, I think, the most well-known organizations. The majority of our respondents said, for example, they were a member of Quality Matters, secondarily EDUCAUSE, a lot of you are members of EDUCAUSE as well, Online Learning Consortium, UPCEA, WCET. So you see that, these are the top online learning organizations that you would expect here. And again, this was leaned on a little bit more heavily from our COLOs from two-year institutions than our 4-year institutions. In terms of professional development topics, so, we asked ways that you're staying informed, but also what do you need to stay informed about? What are some of those top topics that you feel you need more information or professional development on? I don't think anybody's surprised that AI came out on top here, whether you're asking faculty, chief online learning officers, students, instructional designers, probably AI is still going to be the #1 PD topic that they want to learn more about. So 20% of our respondents said AI, but you can also see some of those skill sets that they rank themselves maybe not as skilled in, things related to business acumen, financial management, things related to faculty, working with faculty. You see those policy issues brought out there, legal and regulatory issues, marketing. So I think one of the really great things about our survey is that a lot of the different sections reinforced each other, right? So in ranking for the competencies, and then we return to that in terms of topics, I think the COLOs are a pretty self-aware bunch of individuals, and they're recognizing what skill sets they need to bring in, in the next couple years for their institution, what institutions need today as opposed to 5 years ago, and really is there a gap in their skill set and what PD topics they need to focus on in order to close that gap. Some select open-ended responses from this. Really trying to learn about emerging issues and challenges in online higher ed, for example, AI, and realizing that it impacts more than policy. It impacts course design. It impacts different facets of learning. So you can see AI woven throughout a lot of these open-ended responses, how it's going to impact learning, how to incorporate AI. Brought in a comment here about change management higher education. So I think this is something too that a lot of savvy COLOs are realizing, that to move effectively within an institution and to move those online learning initiatives forward, it most often requires some level of change management, which can be very difficult, and that is a very different skill set as well. We included one here that should give you a little chuckle at the end. Somebody said, I would love 2 intense training titles, which would help immensely. Interpreting Department of Education regulations specific to your institution. Explain it to me like I'm 5 years old. And the even more beneficial, How to Convince Faculty to Adopt Educational Technology, a simple step-by-step guide. So good to see that our COLOs can keep their sense of humor. So we're going to round it out by talking a little bit about institutional challenges. So we asked, what are some of those challenges and barriers to moving those online initiatives forward? Issues with institutional leadership, and that might mean educating up, for example. 31% of our respondents said that. Faculty issues and resistance. And again, in terms of echoing data, this not only echoes internal data for this survey, but also COLO data. So faculty issues, issues with lack of senior administration knowledge. Those were two things that came out in the COLO 9 report, for example. So we are seeing the same things and getting greater data validity each time we see those. Budget and financial issues, about 30% as well. Organizational structure and operations. And I think you can also see that within these challenges, are these same complexities that we talked about in the section about COLO competencies, that COLOs need a very broad and deep skill set in order to move online learning forward. And this is some of the reasons why it is so challenging. There's a culture shift, there's change management, there's working with faculty, there's educating up, there's looking at it from the financial perspective, there's getting involved in marketing, there's making sure it works within the institutional organizational structure and context and climate. It is a big charge. Top challenges and barriers do vary slightly by sector. So looking at the private and public 4 years and then the public 2 years, their number one identified challenge was different. Private 4 years said it's those issues with leadership, that lack of knowledge sometimes. In some cases, it could just be leadership turnover that's causing some issues. Our public 4 years, in terms of top barrier, they said organizational structure and operations. That could relate, for example, to centralization and decentralization issues, could relate to governance issues or policy issues. And then public 2 years said faculty issues. So issues usually around faculty autonomy. That was the number one issue identified, for example, in COLO 9 this year. Some select open-ended responses here. I think a lot of institutions, you can see it in some of these responses, they're still wrestling with how to fully incorporate and mainstream online learning and fully support online learners within that institution. So one of our respondents said there's no longer a division of online to meet students' needs. It's all been placed back into the department, so it's a very decentralized model that they're talking about. And when they did that, that means some people who still do not believe in the power of online education were then moved in charge of some of those programs. So you can see that the difficult culture and context issues there. Somebody else said finding a balance between centralized support and the individuality of teaching. So we're tapping into some of those faculty issues and faculty autonomy issues, realizing that things that can make things more efficient and scalable sometimes dampen instructors' sense of ownership. Absolutely. The push and pull of being an institution that supports both online and on-ground learners. This is something we talked about a lot this year for Chloe, that institutions that are still approaching this as serving two types of learners versus serving a student regardless of what modality they're studying in, they are struggling with this because it's almost like having two separate tracks of support and development and evaluation and all those things. So everyone feels pretty thin, spread pretty thin, supporting both student groups. Absolutely, I could understand that. This is a really good comment. I thought simply talking about it, and we're not. Online learning operates in little pockets like a virtual fight club. It really needs to be a strategic initiative that has institutional support. I think that's very well said. There's still, I think, a lot of discussions maybe for how to do this well and discussions around ownership. And I think also this harkens back to when Eric was talking about the different titles and where some of our senior online leaders came from. If you have the majority of the senior most online learning leader being at the director level, what tables are they not at? At what place do they not have a voice, right? So in these little fight clubs that our institutions are maybe talking about, is it because there is a lack of leadership? There's a leadership vacuum there. Maybe you have some at your institution, but they are really not supported in that leadership role. So good discussion, I think, to take back to your institution. And that goes along with that final open-ended comment here, not reporting directly to the provost, a sign that online isn't as important as it should be. In today's age, and looking at the enrollment trends, I think online should be important at virtually all institutions. So again, another conversation starter perhaps at your own institution. So a little bit of a summary here. The majority of our chief online learning officers have doctoral degrees and more than 16 years of higher ed experience. So highly educated, very experienced. More than 40% of them have a faculty appointments. And a lot of them were promoted from within. So 3/5 were promoted from within their institution. 1 out of 7, as Eric mentioned, indicated that their next step will be retirement. So that as Eric mentioned, that begs the question, is there going to be a leadership vacuum? And maybe some of those individuals that are at that director level, maybe they will be promoted into a higher position. Almost 80% of COLOs have been an online student. I would say that's a huge uptick from years ago. That's really good to see. 1/3 of them completed a fully online degree. Most COLOs indicate that they are very skilled in the UPCEA COLO competencies, and they also indicate that the majority of those things were very important to their institution. Most COLOs stay informed via publications, events, organizations, and peers. And the topics most mentioned by COLOs in terms of their professional development needs were AI, financial management, working with faculty, legal and regulatory issues, and marketing. In terms of the institution, director, executive director, and secondarily VP and AVP are the most common titles for our responding senior online leaders. More than 2/3 do report to the provost or another senior academic leader. And the vast majority have responsibilities for both fully online and hybrid, and in many cases, web-enhanced online courses as well. A lot of functions are unified with the COLO, including instructional designers, the LMS, online learning policies, and more. Online learning at most institutions, our senior leaders have told us, has become a catalyst for organizational change. I think that also speaks to that aspect of change management that we mentioned. QM, EDUCAUSE, OLCEA, UPCEA, and WCET are the associations most noted by our COLOs as ways that they stay informed and connected, and institutional memberships. And the biggest challenge they identified are issues with institutional leaders, faculty issues, including faculty autonomy, financial and budgeting, organizational structure, and then those priorities for online learning not being aligned to institutional strategic priorities. So that is a lot of data. I know you're probably digesting all of that, but let's see if we have some comments and questions. Eric, did you notice any questions in the chat as I was presenting?
Um, there were lots of commentary. One question had to do with, that I responded in here, about whether all this work has been published. And the answer is we're working on it. Literally with the exception of the last hour, we've been
Yeah.
writing the journal article for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions or comments now that you've seen, especially if you filled out the survey, but now that you've seen what your colleagues have
Yeah.
said?
There's certainly a lot of very kind comments that we appreciate in terms of people thinking that this has been helpful. And so that's why we do it.
Absolutely. All right, continue to go ahead and, oh wait, I think we do have a question. I listened to a separate presentation regarding winners and losers in the online educational marketplace. Are you able to comment on this issue? I'm not quite sure if I know what you're referring to there, Chris. What were they winners and losers with regard to? Like, do you mean enrollment? Okay,
Enrollment.
yeah.
The only thing I might say about that is I wouldn't say we did as much in this COLO profile and competency study, but we do in our CLOE studies. We actually do take a look at the items in those studies and break those down to see what differences might exist between low online enrollment, mid online enrollment, and high online enrollment institutions.
Yeah, that's
So go to the QM site is terrific in terms of the CLOE project and all of the old CLOE studies. So you can go see CLOE 9. You can download that. That was published in August. And for all our COLOs, we're officially giving you a heads up that CLOE 10 is coming your way right after the break, the beginning of the January and beginning of spring semester for some of us.
and we will have a slide in that in just 1 second if you want to sign
sure.
up for that. We do have a couple questions here, though. Ryan, that's a very good comment. Curious of how the data compares among the various Carnegie classifications. I'm not sure for this data, but I can tell you that we do look at that for CLOE, and we we rarely see differences among Carnegie classifications versus how that we break it out. I don't know, Eric, if you looked at the data with that in mind at
I
all.
looked, I would say two things that in those earlier online learning leadership studies, I did break things down by Carnegie classification, and so you can see, but now it goes back till 2017 and 2018, but you could see differences across R1, R2, and R3 institutions and M1, 2, and 3. I also did a second study that really focused on the public two-year schools. But the challenge is that the Carnegie classifications have been updated and changed, and so it's not like it's a little bit more
That's true too.
challenging to
Yeah.
do, which is why we kind of have like settled back into the least institutional sectors of private 4-year versus public 4-year versus public 2-year.
Mhm. Jennifer, that's a good question. When institutional leadership was mentioned as a barrier challenge, what exactly does this mean? It can mean a variety of things. It could mean institutional leadership is a barrier because there is consistent or recently consistent turnover. And so you have to, keep making those connections and kind of educating and informing that person, every time new people come on. It could mean that there is a lack of knowledge about online learning, at the provost and president level. So it's a lot of educating up. It could be that senior leaders are not on board with online initiatives. So it might be a, mission or culture clash on that. So I think there's a variety of reasons why institutional leadership can sometimes be identified as a barrier or a challenge. Eric, anything you wanted to add to that?
Not to that comment, but it strikes me as I take a look, I see some friends in the attendee list here. And one of my friends on the list is Deb Adair. And I just want to say that, while she's here, that how much I appreciate QM and QM's, support of this project over the fall and last summer. So I just want to say thanks to Deb for that. Really
Oh,
appreciate it.
awesome. Thank you. Yeah, we have somebody that raised their hand, so please go ahead. And while you give that individual permission to speak, I'm going to move on to this slide, just so you can copy that information. So Erica mentioned that Chloe 10 is underway. Barbara was also kind enough to put the link for Chloe 9 in the chat if you haven't had a chance to check that out. But if you would like to receive the Chloe 10 survey, please go ahead and use this link here to sign up. You do receive an individual link to the survey for your institution. And so, Susan, do you have a question?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you
Oh,
just fine.
okay, great. Actually, I had two questions now. I was just writing one into the chat, but I just deleted it.
Okay.
One of my questions was, did you define the categories for people when you were doing the survey, such as the management? Do you have management leadership experience? Because I was thinking, I've been a faculty member for 30 years, and I would say, yes, I have a lot of management and leadership experience from teaching all these years and doing a lot of managing work and leadership work, not only within my classrooms, but also just, paperwork, administrative stuff that is included in a faculty teaching position. So I would answer that, yes, I've had 30 years of that too, along with teaching. And, I'm just wondering, like, how did you define some of these categories for the respondents so you wouldn't get skewed results? I'm not even sure if that made a difference to you. I was just curious about that when I was reading the results and the percentages. And my second question is, I'm currently working on my dissertation I'm at the University of Missouri, Columbia, and I'm working on online prisoner higher education programs, of which we need to do a lot more work in that area. So I was just wondering if you knew of any special resources or organizations for prisoner online higher ed in our country. They do a lot in Australia and different countries, not so much here. So that was like a second question, which I'm not even sure if you have information on that, but I just thought I'd throw it out there. So thank you.
Thank you. Good questions. Eric, I don't think that we defined any of those in the survey. So in some cases, yeah, it is up to open to interpretation. Probably because, they were not in that faculty role, or we were not asking them based on their faculty role. They probably would not think of classroom management. They would think more of other types of management. But what do you think, Eric? I think you froze for me. Okay. Um, and in terms of your second question, I personally don't know of any resources, but that's a really good question, and I hadn't thought about that, Susan. But I'm glad that you're investigating that for your dissertation. Yeah.
I'd make two comments. One, the first question about, how did we, define like management leadership? I think for the reasons that Susan mentioned, that lots of different roles may have, being a faculty member, you get leadership and management experience, is part of that role. So we didn't constrain people with like, some sort of preconceived notions of those, but we did leave it up for sort of self-interpretation. For the extra resources, first, congratulations on working on your dissertation. Remember, the most important part of your dissertation is finishing. Um,
Yeah.
but secondly, you may want to think about, sometimes you might at least explore whether there's any research that's been published through OLJ, the Online Learning Journal. That could be a good source.
Yeah.
I'm not certain if it does, but it's worth checking out.
Very good suggestion. So with that, we're going to close it out. I do want to mention two things that maybe have helped you. First and foremost, we talked a lot about online strategy today and the very complex world and role of chief online learning officers. If this is something your institution needs help thinking about and talking through, whether it's building momentum, setting administrative goals, really looking at institutional strategy for online and marrying that with your goals for online and your enrollment goals specifically, assessing online readiness, any of those things, we do offer consulting. So I encourage you, please do reach out to us. This is very customized to your institution and your needs. So please do visit the website there. And also, speaking of things that COLOs want to learn about, including AI and all of those are good things, we do have a winter retreat that's going on, self-paced workshops. So especially at this busy time, or if you want a more relaxed approach to professional development, these are self-paced. You can complete them all the way through March. And these are 3 workshops dedicated to improving the student experience. So UDL, relational pedagogy, voice and choice, it's associated with a certificate as well. So go ahead and check that out on our website. And that is all from me and Eric today. I want to thank you so much for joining us. Also thank Julie and UPCEA. And if you have any questions following, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Hope to see you all in the future. Thank you very much.